And this one is also our Discord pick of the week, winning with exactly 43 sliced kiwis. And it's no surprise because this game is designed by the same designer and is the spiritual successor to the game Dwellings of Eldervale, which is a game that gets a lot of praise, and it's probably somewhere in my top 20 games of all time, and it's never leaving my collection, which is a pretty good reason for this one to be my own personal pick of the week. And if you're familiar with Dwellings, you will see a lot of similarities with this game. There are some interesting changes to this game that Dwellings doesn't have, but then there's also some features that Dwellings of Eldervale has that this one doesn't. And I don't think the differences between these two games makes one vastly better than the other. My recommendation would just be to go for the one that you think has the better theme, or the theme that will allow it to get played more with your playgroup. And just like Dwellings of Eldervale, this one is a worker placement where players are going to be choosing asymmetric factions that each have different abilities and powers, and each faction is going to have 4 different worker types, and in Andromeda's Edge, these workers are starships. And these different starships can have some different placement rules or even some different abilities depending on which faction you're playing as, but then they can also have different power values because you can get into combat in this game. And just like in Dwellings of Eldervale, if you have a base unit out on the board and you have the resources to do so, you can perform an action in order to turn that unit into a building, and that will score you victory points as well as some other benefits, but it also removes one of your workers from your worker pool since you've essentially converted it into a building, which is a really fun mechanism that I'm happy to see transferred over to this game. Each tile represents a different planet, and these different planets will have different actions associated with them, and in order to perform these different actions, players are going to be taking turns choosing one of their units that they have available and then choosing a tile to go put it out on the main board. And these actions can do different things like gain or convert resources, which are used to perform most other actions in the game, and some of these other actions can be gaining more ships, converting ships into buildings, gaining different one-time use ability cards or objective cards which can score you victory points at the end of the game, or even gaining different action tiles which you'll be attaching to your player board, which will give you additional actions when you decide to take all your workers back. Because that is the other option that players have on their turn. Instead of putting one of your workers out onto the board, you can instead choose to take all your workers back, and when you do that, you're going to have a few different action spots on your own player board, including those tiles that I just mentioned, where you'll be able to assign those workers and take bonus actions. And this is one of those things that makes this game a lot different from most other Euros out there, because you don't actually have rounds in this game. Instead, you're just choosing to put a worker out or to take all your workers back, and you can do this on any turn. There's no pattern to this, and players aren't necessarily doing these things at the same time. And yes, this means that there's also no cleanup phase, which is another nice break from your typical Euro game. Players are going to be scoring victory points throughout the game as well as at the end of the game, but something to note here is that the different tiles out on the main board are going to be each associated with a different color, and the different tiles that you take to attach to your own personal board are also going to be associated with a certain color. And anytime that you build a building on one of the planet tiles, or anytime that you take one of those action tiles into your hand, you're going to be moving up the associated track that matches that color. And this acts as a multiplier for that color so that you're going to be scoring more victory points the more that you invest in it. But unlike Dwellings of Eldervale, these tracks also have all sorts of bonuses on them, so as you're moving up that track, you're going to be gaining those bonuses. Anytime that 2 players end up on the same tile, that's going to trigger a battle, and the way that battles work in this game is that each of your ships is going to be associated with a certain amount of dice, and the more ships that you have there, you're going to be able to roll more dice on your side of that battle. And only the highest valued die counts in the battle, but if you are a tie, you're going to be falling down to the next highest and the next highest, so on and so forth, until someone breaks the tie and wins that battle. But unlike in Dwellings of Eldervale, you'll actually be able to re-roll any values that are lower than the number of ships that you have in that battle, which is going to give you an extra advantage for having more ships in the battle. And if you have any ships adjacent to the tile that you're currently fighting on, you do have the option to call those in and add their strength to your battle. The player who loses is going to have all their ships end up in the scrapyard, and you don't lose those ships, but when you recall them back, you're not allowed to place those on any of your action spaces, but you will be compensated with some other options instead. And another new mechanism that wasn't included in Dwellings of Eldervale is the addition of the event track. And the way that this track works is that it's going to be moving upward each time that players take certain actions, and anytime it reaches the end of that track, it's going to get reset to the start of the track, but it's also going to cause the players to draw an event card. The event card can introduce different rules or effects or even scoring opportunities, but it's also going to trigger a new tile being added to the board. And finally, it's also going to trigger scoring for a particular color, so players that did invest in that color will be able to score their victory points for it. And the game continues like this until the end of the game is triggered, and then players will do one more round of scoring, then the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along because you'll get an additional faction added to your pledge completely for free. And I do recommend following along with this game because I'm sure there's going to be a ton of content coming out soon that's going to get you really hyped, and it might be a game that you'll want to jump in on. But also, in the interest of just providing you the best info as possible, don't forget that you can just go ahead and buy Dwellings of Eldervale right now. And I'm pretty sure they still do offer all the Kickstarter content, so you won't be missing anything if you want to go all in. And you might prefer one or the other depending on how much you like or dislike the changes between these games. But like I said, I don't think the changes are significant to make one vastly better than the other, so I would just recommend going for the one with the theme that you like the most.